Capcom is probably the video game company that endorses the most multimedia adaptations of their games. All their big franchises, like Street Fighter, Resident Evil, and Monster Hunter, have movies, and there's even adaptations for series like Onimusha, Devil May Cry, or Power Stone. Some of these adaptations are alright, but others are pretty infamous, and I think the vast majority of people aren't very excited for the 8th Resident Evil movie. Out of all of these, there's one cartoon that's often considered the worst game adaptation of all time and is reviled within a niche fandom: Darkstalkers. Darkstalkers the animated series is based on the Darkstalkers fighting game series. It aired in 1995 and was produced by Capcom alongside a company called Graz Entertainment, who would also help Capcom make an infamous Street Fighter cartoon a few months later. The show was a massive flop, and it only aired for 13 episodes. Darkstalkers, in the modern day, has a small but devoted fan base, which is impressive considering how long the last release was. Within this fanbase, there's a lot of derision for the show. It's pretty much universally seen as terrible. You know what? I can pretty much guarantee 95% of people who make those jokes have not actually seen the show. And that's fine, because yeah, it's pretty bad. But you know what? It's spooky season, so I might as well play devil's advocate a little bit, because it's not that bad. Most people treat the very idea of this show as a joke, which leads to people not actually watching it and criticizing the show on its own merits. So I want to defend it a little, because is the Darkstalkers cartoon good? No. But is it the worst game adaptation ever made? Definitely not. If you enjoy, please subscribe, as I'm trying to get to at least 1,000 subscribers by the end of 2025. Thank you. There were 2 Darkstalkers games released at the time of the cartoon's airing: Darkstalkers The Night Warriors and Night Warriors Darkstalkers Revenge. The show had to make a few changes to the story of the games to make it all fit as a cartoon. The main villain is an alien named Pyron, and he's also the antagonist of the show. Pyron is bent on ruling Earth, and half the cast of Darkstalkers and the Night Warriors joins him, while the other half oppose him. Just like the games, the characters are all based on monster tropes. Rikuo is the fishman, Anacharis is the mummy, Dimitri is the vampire, etc. Dimitri and a succubus named Morrigan are Pyron's top generals, although they're pretty much constantly bickering and are clearly on his side for their own selfish reasons. You might not realize it since they're both faces of the games, but Dimitri and Morrigan are supposed to be evil. I find that when you're adapting the story of a fighting game, you can take a lot more creative liberties than you would be able to take otherwise. Because the primary draw of a fighting game series is to see characters fight. The first episode centers around Pyron recruiting the evil Darkstalkers, and we're first introduced to the whole cast. It's actually a pretty strong opening, because it makes me excited to see which characters will show up in future episodes. Darkstalkers has a colorful, spooky cast, and the games take you all across the world, so it actually kind of lends itself well to a serialized kids cartoon in some ways. I'll talk about the characters more in a bit, because I should address the tone before I get to any of that. The cartoon is clearly made for kids, which is a huge departure from the games that seem to be more for a teenage audience. They're spooky, a little violent, and certain characters like Morrigan or Felicia have clearly sexualized designs. Morrigan is literally a succubus. I'm surprised you can even say that in a kid's cartoon. The cartoon stands off a lot of the edge of the games for a preteen audience. It's a lot more comical and less serious. It's silly, it's dumb, but making cartoons based on properties with older target demographics was just what they did in the 80s and 90s, and it's not really fair to the series if we're not meeting it where it's at. Honestly, making a cartoon like this out of Darkstalkers isn't that out of the ordinary. The Darkstalkers games already operate under cartoon logic. Characters will squatch and stretch, and have bizarre attacks that don't really make sense when you think about it too hard. Victor, the Frankenstein's monster of the games, has a butt slap attack. For some reason, Morrigan has an attack where she fires rockets at her opponents. The series also got way darker in tone, starting with Darkstalkers 3, which hadn't been released at the time of the cartoon. The antagonist is a devil, One of the new characters is entirely themed around guns, and the game introduces a war zone and a giant pulsating fetus as stage themes. From a modern perspective, we think of that tone as being inherent to the Darkstalkers brand, but in 1995 they were only on their way to that direction. You might not think of Darkstalkers as being overly dark if you were, say, making an adaptation out of it. I should probably address the biggest change this show makes to the Darkstalkers format and tone. The main character, he's a young boy named Harry Grimoire. His last name is Grimoire, but is pronounced Grimoire for some reason. He's not Italian, he's just a boy wizard, a few years before that was popular. Harry is the main character of this series, and represents the ultimate teenage fantasy of having a cat girl show up to your room and tell you you're a wizard. He's essentially the audience's stand-in to the world of Darkstalkers, and he might just be the part of the series that gets the most hate. I don't understand it at all. Look, plenty of cartoons have kid characters that are meant for the audience to relate to, but just end up being annoying brats the whole show. Harry isn't that. He's competent enough, and his budding wizard powers are enough to be useful, while not being the be-all end-all that solves the plot each time. He has at least a little bit of personality, which makes him perfectly fine to watch. He never really does anything annoying throughout the whole runtime of the show. I think people are mostly just projecting the qualities of other annoying 90s cartoon characters onto him, because Harry was actually kind of likable throughout the show. He's a descendant of Merlin, which is why he gets wrapped into the plot, and he gains new magical powers as the story goes on. I get not liking that there's a random kid in the show and thinking it's stupid, that's reasonable, but at the same time, come on, it's a kid show. And the Darkstalkers games don't really have one set protagonist, so it's actually fair to introduce one for a cartoon like this. Harry is never the sole focus of the show, to the point that other plotlines or characters feel underbaked in comparison. It is a little funny how the only reason the plot happens, and how he's able to travel so much, is because he's rich. He lives in a mansion, and can basically go anywhere in the world thanks to his dad's credit card, which is just a white piece of paper with the word Visa written on it. One problem that fighting game adaptations have consistently run into in the past is representing the full cast of characters and staying true to them while telling their stories. Darkstalkers' episodic nature allows them to give each character at least one episode primarily dedicated to them, and the monster theme means that they can stay true to everyone's personalities for the most part, although there are plenty of liberties taken. When you look at something like the live-action Street Fighter movie from the 90s, for example, Dulcim is a doctor working for the bad guys, which bears almost no resemblance to his character in the games, and characters like Balrog have their allegiances changed for no reason. That's something Darkstalkers won't do. I would say the biggest change is probably with Felicia, the Catwoman. In the games, she's most known for being a performer and has more cat-like qualities than the Felicia of the show. The version of Felicia from the show is more serious and driven, even if she does have a lighter side. She's basically the character who sets the plot in motion. Morrigan and Dimitri are also notable because they're the main villains. In the games they oppose each other and Pyron, but here they're all on the same side because the plot couldn't really work if they were all in it for themselves. They're constantly bickering and fighting amongst themselves though, so it does still feel like them in that regard, and it gives them some personality. Another thing to keep in mind is the accents. Oh god, the accents. These monsters are from all over the world, so there's a lot of bad accents.
Who are you? What are you doing with me? Why am I even asking?
Morrigan speaks in a terrible Scottish accent that's constantly slipping, and Dimitri obviously has the vampire voice. Lord Raptor has an accent that they couldn't really tell if it's supposed to be British or Australian, and that's funny too. The accents are stupid and very cartoonish, but you know what? It makes it more entertaining. Except Bishamon. He's Japanese, and the accent... it's rough. That's all I'm willing to say on it. Now, it's important to note that the stories of each character in Darkstalkers, especially at the point in the series, weren't that fleshed out, because that's just how fighting games work. You have to glean a lot about each character through a small amount of information, and forming interpretations of each character through their designs and bits of their backstories is the norm. So yes, the interpretations on each character are simplified and cartoony, but they at least keep the basic characteristics in most cases, and even in the source material the characters are fairly simple. Unfortunately, there's not that much deep Sasquatch lore. For what Darkstalkers is, it does a fine enough job with most characterizations, even if you might be disappointed if you're a huge fan of one character in particular. Like I was with Senko. Yeah, the series brings in Donovan and Senko, the two characters who originated in Night Warriors Darkstalkers Revenge, for their own episodes. Once again, they're fine. In that game, they're both monster hunters, which is portrayed here with them wanting to destroy all Darkstalkers, a goal that initially puts them at odds against the good Darkstalkers. Senko, who is my favorite Darkstalkers character, has a whole episode partly devoted to her backstory, and they change it by having her sister be killed by Dimitri. Senko is referred to as a ghost, which isn't really accurate to the type of monster she is, but whatever. I kinda wish Anita could have showed up in the story alongside Donovan though. It would have been interesting to see another kid wizard interact with Harry. What initially got me interested in checking out this show was seeing clips of it online that were actually kinda funny. There is a running joke where multiple people refer to Rikuo, the creature from the Black Lagoon parallel, as being curiously attractive for a fishman, which is just really funny to me.
My dear ambassador, even though you are curiously attractive for a scaly freak, put me down, you foul-smelling first aid kit! Riku of Atlantis is no thief! For a fishman, you are strangely attractive. Oh, I can understand the attraction of the fishmen, but I always know you'd return to your little snuggle scarab. Oh, look at the circles under my eyes. I am spending way too much time with these air breathers.
Oh, you're almost pretty. For a fishman.
But there is a misunderstanding. I am not evil. I refused to join them when they ordered me to.
I do not believe you, though you are strangely attractive for a fishman.
Something about the specificity of that phrase, and the fact that everyone comes up with it independently, is just great. Besides that, the show's humor is average. There's plenty of pop culture references that get a laugh out of me, mostly because they're dumb. We are introduced to Felicia, with her in New York failing an audition for Cats. But hey, a laugh's a laugh. I think Lord Raptor, the Australian zombie who plays rock and roll, was probably the funniest part of the show. In this universe, he canonically opened for the Grateful Dead and was the original Sweeney Todd, both on Broadway and in real life, like he was the actual barber Sweeney Todd. Allegedly. I'm not making any of this up. There's also some humor that comes from Anakaris the Mummy, specifically his meat-headedness. There's one fairly entertaining scene where the heroes have been captured in a castle and have to trick him into letting them out by outsmarting him. The smart part of the word outsmart is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. Darkstalkers is, of course, based on a fighting game, so fighting makes up the majority of most episodes. I was surprised that a lot of characters keep their specific techniques and attacks from the source material. They're about as entertaining as they could be considering the budget. I didn't really mention it until now, but the show is very ugly. Characters' faces are bizarre messes, and the animators had to cheap out in a lot of places. Some characters have fireball attacks in the source material, and here, every time they use them, they just shoot monocolored blasts of energy. The Darkstalkers cast at least have some pretty good designs, so it's hard to completely mess them up. Besides Morrigan's hair that looks like green plastic. Morrigan is also obviously toned down quite a lot. She's still a succubus, but she's had lots of the sexier elements of her design and animations cut. She still has cleavage though, and Felicia's design was basically unaltered, which could be pretty risque for a show with this target demographic. They also added some midriff to Senko's outfit, which wasn't there before, and that was a little surprising. Darkstalkers is not that good of a show. It's not bad though. It's silly and cartoonish and really shallow, but goddammit, I was entertained by it. When you compare it to the cartoons that were big when it released, it's pretty much in line with them quality-wise. It might not be the ideal way to adapt what Darkstalkers is, but the show itself doesn't really have anything that brings it lower or higher than an average kids cartoon from the 90s. For the life of me, I cannot understand why anyone who has seen the show would call it the worst video game adaptation ever made. If someone grew up with the show, they'd probably just see it as a cool, spooky cartoon about monsters battling for the fate of the planet. And if it was widespread enough that enough people could have been nostalgic for it, I imagine it could have become a lot more beloved. A lot of the criticism towards Darkstalkers, the cartoon, comes from people who haven't seen the show or just make easily disprovable claims about it. For example, look at this article on Games Radar, written by Ryan Winterhalter in 2010. They directly blame USA Network for the poor quality of the show by claiming that USA Network took a game starring a succubus and turned it into a cartoon. That's not true, because the show was syndicated, and USA Network had nothing to do with its creation. They also said that Darkstalkers was preceded by the Street Fighter cartoon, which also isn't true. That cartoon aired afterwards and was produced by USA Network. There's also a confusing line where the article claims that the character Sasquatch became Bigfoot and lived in a village with others of his kind capable of vomiting snow at will. I don't know if you've actually played the games, but that's not original to the show or anything. The village and snow powers are a part of Sasquatch's backstory. You could just look the stuff up. My lazy ass got most of the information on the production of the show from Wikipedia. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but when mainstream coverage on a show can be this bad, how can we trust their opinions on the quality of something so closely? Darkstalkers is a 30-year-old show. Realistically, it doesn't matter all that much if it's good or bad. It just annoys me because no one wants to say anything on it that's not, haha, oh god, not the Darkstalkers cartoon, as if they'd actually watched it. Refusing to engage with something at all because the very idea of it seems like a joke is an incurious way of looking at the world. I'm not saying you have to watch something bad to have an opinion on it. In fact, you probably shouldn't watch the Darkstalkers show at all. Just be more willing to give some things the benefit of the doubt sometimes, and if you could not lazily spread incorrect information, that would be good too. After all, who's afraid of the Darkstalkers? Happy Halloween everyone, by the way. I know it's not actually Halloween, but Halloween's basically a month-long thing anyways. October 1st is the second best time to make a spooky themed video. Also, I'm recording this in June. That's about it, so thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later. Say what you will about the Darkstalkers cartoon, it at least has a really cool J-Rock song in the end credits for some reason.
And now, back to Darkstalkers.